Initiative brokered personally by Commander Keeler and Transglobal's premier, Commander Ryman.
5 years might not seem like a huge amount of time to wait for a sequel, but when the original game is an RTS from the mid-90s, then those 5 years might as well be a whole generation. PC gaming technology was evolving at a breathtaking pace, and the genre itself had progressed well past its infancy.
Yes, sir.
Conventions were established, competition was rife, and expectations were high. Hi, I'm Calivan, and today we're going to talk about a game that did not meet those expectations as we take a look back at Z, Still Soldiers. The original Z wasn't a massive groundbreaking hit, but it was enjoyable and very different from the other things that were available at the time. It had its own way of doing things, but it did those things very well, and as such it got a high amount of praise from both critics and gamers. It featured arcade-style graphics, animations and sounds that were a lot of fun to engage with, and the whole game was wrapped up in a humorous sort of charm that enhanced rather than distracted from the gameplay. Now, you could describe the core mechanics as somewhat basic, but that did result in a game that was both easy to learn and very easy to play, even if the missions themselves were no cakewalk and many would require several attempts to crack. I think the best way to describe Z is it's a real-time strategy game from 1993 that was released in 1996. The technologies it required, the computing power and even the main codebase were all in place at that time, but a string of delays ended up pushing the release date back further and further. Because of these delays, it would be forever compared to the likes of Command & Conquer and Warcraft, rather than the earlier Dune 2, which it had several advantages over. Because of this, it never quite had the impact that it might have done, but the Bitmap brothers weren't quite done with the franchise, and in 2001 they would release the follow-up, Z, Still Soldiers. This iteration of Z will be very different from the last. The 2D arcade-style graphics and the cartoony unit portraits were nowhere to be found, nor were the simple pixelated colourful maps. Instead, the entire game engine will be fully rendered in 3D, adding elevation into the mix and giving the user the ability to rotate the camera into any position they chose. The automated production system based on sector capture was cast aside, and instead a more standard income and expenditure resource model was added. Construction robots allowed you to build production and tech structures, and new units could be ordered at will. There was a massive increase in unit options, not only on land but also in the air and on the sea. Helicopters, gunboats and many more allowed you to take the fight to the enemy in a whole new way, and a new research and upgrade system allowed you to both unlock new units and make your other units more powerful. The game featured a skirmish mode, multiplayer versus support, and a pretty hefty single-player story campaign that featured some 30 missions across 5 chapters. Each chapter kicked off with an animated cutscene, and every mission featured an in-engine introduction to show you the lay of the land and outline your objectives. Just as before, Still Soldiers wasn't attempting to tell a serious tale about war and a dark future, but instead a light-hearted story about a bunch of idiotic but lovable robots, something you could laugh along with as you enjoyed the gameplay. Still Soldiers wasn't aiming to be a modern version of the original game, but instead more of a regular RTS set in the same universe that still featured some of the original concepts, and also the humour that made the first game so endearing. However, there was one teeny tiny problem. It was bad. Really, really bad. Now, normally on my channel, I tend to stick to the games that I really like, or at least the ones that I am fascinated by. I do this for 2 reasons. Firstly, my own experiences allow me to give a far more in-depth breakdown. And secondly, I like my criticisms to originate from a place of love. It's easy to just dump on something that everybody already knows is deeply flawed. But in this case, I'm willing to make an exception because I'm really fond of the original Z, and I'm equally fond of its creator, the Bitmap brothers. I think Still Soldiers is an interesting case study into what constitutes a bad game. Now, I'm not a professional critic, so instead of a complex matrix of features and interactions, there are just 3 questions that I tend to ask myself. Am I enjoying the gameplay? Do I feel satisfied when I complete a mission or an objective? And do I want to keep playing? Before we talk about these questions, I think it's worth mentioning that I've been revisiting the 2001 PC release, No patches, no mods, and none of the later versions available for iOS or for Android. This copy was installed from the original physical media that I purchased pre-owned for £3.50. The only concession that I've had to make is that I'm using a no CD crack, as the DRM bundled with the original game is one of those horrific backdoor systems that's been blocked in the last few versions of Windows. So, let's talk about enjoyment. The core problem is that the entire game is just really frustrating to engage with. Every single thing that you do, whether it's constructing a building, managing a production queue, or simply something as basic as issuing a move or attack order, appears to have been deliberately designed to irritate you. It reminds me of those old pop-up adverts you used to get that moved away from your mouse cursor when you attempted to reach the close button. As each mission or skirmish progresses, every tiny little new frustration builds upon the last until you reach a culmination point of irritation that makes you just want to close the game and go and play something else. Say we want to build a unit. In pretty much every RTS ever, we generally do the following. We select the structure, either by just left-clicking on it or clicking on something that represents it on some sort of sidebar. Then we click the unit that we want to build. If we want to change the rally point of a structure, we click on it to select it, then we click somewhere on the map. And to keep ourselves sane, we use the same mouse button to set a rally point as we do to issue a move order, as those events are related. In Steel Soldiers, we have to right-click the structure to open a little floating 3D build menu that takes a fraction of a second to open. Not long enough to feel like complaining about it is valid, but just long enough to make you wonder if your click registered. This doesn't use icons to represent units, but instead in-game 3D models, which, because of the low poly count, all look exactly the same. To set a rally, we have to right-click the structure to open the horrible 3D interface, click the rally button, and then click somewhere on the map. We can also set the queue to auto-repeat, which is a nice feature, but once again we have to right-click the structure, and then we have to click on a 3D button that in no way at all represents this action. It's a vertical line that goes down, turns right, and has an arrow on the end, which, as we all know, is the universally accepted sign for anything but repeat. I just can't convey with words how horrible it is to interact with this GUI. Because of the insane choice to use 3D rendered polygons for orders and unit portraits, everything is so unrecognisable. It blends into the 3D world itself, and as such it feels entirely unnatural. This creates a situation where basic functions require actual brain power. So instead of figuring out what orders to issue, you're instead busy with figuring out how to issue those orders. A similar frustration is felt when trying to tell your soldiers what to do. If you drag select multiple units, only one of them is highlighted, so it's difficult to tell what you actually have selected at any one time. This is compounded by the fact that drag select selects everything, all of your combat units, all of your constructors, and all of your mission critical units, and you're also unable to do anything fancy like double click on a unit to select all of the matching ones on the screen. I remember that one thing I really praised the original game for when I took a look at it a few weeks back was how smart your individual robots were. They didn't exactly act independently, but they had a certain freedom to act in a small area around them. That meant that they automatically engaged nearby units, captured points, or occupied empty vehicles that were in their local vicinity. Steel Soldiers has none of this. Instead, your units tend to sit exactly where they are placed while an enemy hammers away at the construction bot standing next to them. Until they don't. Sometimes they appear just to run off and die and chase things, but only occasionally and never when you want them to. There are some settings you can give each unit via a horrible right-click 3D menu, but the defensive, neutral and aggressive settings appear to make very little difference. Your units also don't quite know how to react to the 3D world that they're placed within. Line of sight plays a factor in shooting, and shots will be physically blocked by the game world, but the robots are totally unaware of this and will keep shooting at nothing until something else comes along and kills them. This is especially problematic when working around the destructive bridges. I've seen my own bot standing on one, frantically blasting away at enemies on the other side, completely oblivious to the fact that the bridge walls are not only blocking their shots, but the bridge itself is absorbing the damage because of it. Idiotic robots might be fun during cutscenes, but not during gameplay. The rest of your interactions with this game follow the same pattern as engaging with your units and production structures. It's hard to put your finger on exactly what's wrong, apart from the fact that nothing quite does what you want in the way you want it to. You've got to have pixel-perfect precision when you're clicking a capture point. Clicking on the map never quite positions the camera where you want it to go, and placing a new building requires the same sort of precision as swapping out a golden statue with a bag of sand in a booby-trapped ancient temple. If someone told me the game had a number generator that offsets all of your orders and UI interactions by a random number of pixels, I'd believe them. The thing is, each individual problem on its own and outside of any other context wouldn't be that bad. It would be nothing more than a minor annoyance, something you would learn to work around and soon forget. But together, each instrument of irritation comes together to create a mighty orchestra of frustration that sucks all enjoyment from the gameplay experience. So let's talk about satisfaction. This is pretty simple. I want to be challenged, and I want to feel satisfied when I overcome that challenge. Unfortunately, most of the challenge comes not from the difficulty in tackling the opposition AI, but from working around the terrible interface in such a way that you don't make a critical mistake. On some missions, you've got to protect an individual who is just as weak as any of your other units. The problem is that these objective units look almost identical to your other robots, and they're not highlighted in any special way. Remember the problems with drag selecting? This makes it very easy to accidentally send your mission critical bot into battle. After a while, I realised that the easiest way to complete a mission is just to capture as much as possible and then destroy all of the enemy production structures. Then, and only then, can you go around and complete whatever busy work that the mission objectives require from you. And defeating the AI is not that difficult. It appears capable of little more than building units and running them piecemeal towards whatever defences you've got established. There's also a lack of scripted events during the campaign, so there's no additional challenges or flavour there. You just need to cap points, build a few production structures, pop them on repeat, and then run a big wedge of anything towards the enemy until you win. No strategy, no tactics, no planning. You don't even have to worry about unit compositions. Just build a lot of stuff, any stuff, and then throw it directly at the enemy. Balancing is also an issue. Some units just seem way more powerful than they should be. Take the scout helicopter for example. That thing can absolutely destroy enemy buildings in seconds. Even if they're protected by SAM sites, you just run a bunch of them up to the enemy, quickly nuke down the SAM sites and then destroy all their buildings. I even failed a mission using this tactic. Not because I got destroyed, but because I got too trigger happy and killed too many buildings by mistake. Because the game is so frustrating to play and any challenge it presents comes from the difficulty of the mechanical operation rather than strategy or tactics, there's no real satisfaction experienced when you complete a mission. Instead, it's a whirlwind of relief that it's over, quickly followed by annoyance that you have to do it all over again.
Dear God, I can't wait to see home again. We're not going home!
Unfortunately for Steel Soldiers, there's one final failing that really puts a hard stop on any continuing desire to play, or to carry on with the campaign at the very least. The characters, the story and the cutscenes make the same attempt at humour that was found in the previous game, but this time they just all fall flat on their face. Comedy is difficult, but there is one thing that anyone can do, and that's to judge comedy. Did it make you laugh or smile? No? Then it's probably not funny, at least not to you. But there is something far worse than not funny, and that's unfunny. That's when you can tell something or someone is trying really hard to be funny, but is failing so badly that you actually feel uncomfortable. Something deep within you is begging for it to end and for everyone to be put out of their misery. The animation is fine, and I would even go as far to say that the comic book style is actually pretty neat and fits the setting well. There isn't anything wrong with the voice actors, they've even got Peter Serafinowicz in there. You know, this guy, or you might know him as this guy, and sometimes this guy. But the writing and the direction is just so awful, and if I wasn't recording, I would have skipped them in a heartbeat. In this man's humble opinion, Steel Soldiers is a complete, total and abject failure. But you know what? Somewhere, deep inside, hidden behind the bad interface, dreadful AI and cringe-inducing story is a half-decent game trying to get out. That might seem like an odd thing to say after piling on so much criticism, but there are things to like. Early 3D is always a problem, especially games that decided to use it in the first few years of the 21st century. The poly counts are too few and the textures too low res to properly represent infantry, but the vehicles aren't half bad and look kinda neat. I'm also fond of the sector capture system, and I think the idea of dividing a map up this way works pretty well. I'm a big fan of RTS games that give the player multiple objectives, so that strategies other than driving a massive army into my opponent's base are viable enough to make gameplay more varied and interesting. The more general RTS concepts of building, production and upgrades fit these sector systems well, and there's plenty of merit in these sorts of ideas. I don't think Steel Soldiers is bad because it doesn't play like the first game. I think it's bad because it's also terribly executed. If the Bitmap brothers had tried to copy the mechanics of the original game exactly, then I think Steel Soldiers would be just as bad. A difficult to control early 3D version of Zed with none of the humour or charm would still have been an utter failure, and would have had the added sin of being a bad copy rather than a badly executed original idea. I think what the Bitmap brothers really needed to do was to wait a few more years for 3D to improve to the point that it could properly represent their units without losing the charm and character that the players expected. They needed to throw away the idea of a 3D interface and use regular elements on a 2D layer, and they needed to implement a reliable and intuitive control system. If they'd done that, but kept the large variety of units, sector capture system, and the more traditional RTS base building and unit production system, they would probably have had a really solid game on their hands. If you think about it, then I think someone else did just that, because 3 years later we would get Dawn of War. It actually accomplishes all of what Steel Soldiers was trying to achieve, from a mechanical sense at least, and a whole lot more too. Come to think of it, that's probably worth talking about, so maybe I should do a video on Dawn of War. For whilst the enemies of the Emperor still draw breath, there shall be no peace.
Loud and clear. Understood.
Hi there. Thanks for sitting with me while we took a look back at the dumpster fire that was Steel Soldiers. If you enjoyed this video, then click the like button. And if you've experienced this mess for yourself, then let me know how you got on with a comment or on the Discord. And as usual, if you want more of this sort of thing, then subscribe to my channel and I hope to see you back soon.